morning, everyone. So we have 67 people, a few more will join us. Just as a quick reminder, this meeting is being recorded. So if you don't want people to see your face, don't turn on your video. If you want people to see your face and all the silly things you do, turn on your video. And actually, in most cases, there's not going to be a whole lot to be seen. And then I don't really want to do that. If you have any questions, raise your hand and or put it in the chat that you have a question. And we will answer them. I'm going to start a poll for you all to answer. There's 6 questions about flight mechanics and of a low altitude flight, and we will go through these in a few minutes, and we're going to answer all of them and see what you mean and talk about them and all of that. So while we start the poll, just answer it as you see fit. Yes, it's Callum. The lectures, video lectures for this week. If you haven't watched the lectures because there was some issues with the videos over the week, don't worry about it. Just please do. Just as a reminder, next week we have a 2-hour session. The first hour, first 45, 50 minutes of that will be over the material that's in topic number 6. High altitude flight mechanics, so orbital mechanics, problems. I promise that I've hopefully fixed some of these we had a couple weeks ago when I tried working through the atmosphere example. I still owe you that. I need to re-record it, and we'll go from there. How will the midterm work? The midterm works exactly like the glider quiz. It's an online quiz that goes live. Since most of you had issues, or a lot of you, maybe not most of you, had issues accessing through the learning module, just remind people that the best way to access stuff is via assessment and feedback. We know those links work, and such. And if you do it that way, you should be set. So if you can't access it through the learning module, try assessment and feedback. Obviously, the midterm is assignment number 2 instead of number 1. Midterm's also pretty straightforward. It's a very short midterm. It covers high level topics of it. There's no significant calculations on it, so don't worry about that. We didn't change it for this year. There's just too many other things changing. The goal is long term that the midterm is going to be a bit more substantial assessment, and it will become a larger portion of the overall unit mark, help balance out the final exam. But we just didn't have time for that this year. Yeah, so repeating the 2-hour session. So next week we have 2 hours. It should be in your personalized timetable and correct by now. The first hour will be over topic number 6, and the second hour will be preparation for the midterm and going through some problem sets. If you have any problems that you want worked through, or if not worked through live, worked through and posted, please post them on the discussion board. And the appropriate discussion board for this one is, you can do it in the lecture series, just make sure you title the thread correctly, but you can also do it in the assessment questions, and we'll go from there. How many topics does the midterm cover? It covers topics 1 through 6, so through the beginning of next week, and it goes from there. It is still 10%. It is not a particularly evil assessment, so don't worry about that. 10% of the unit mark. Where do you find your glider activity quiz mark? You don't, just to make sure that the settings were right, because there were some issues with the settings and stuff, I've hidden it, and it will go back live again 10 days after last Friday. So what is that? So it was closed on the 30th. That was at the 8th of November, and you should see it then. Your past leader said the midterm was evil or the final exam was evil? Wow, I didn't think the midterm was that evil. I mean, the average last year was quite high. It's evil because it's short. Um, well, Nicholas, that's good words to live by. Never underestimate an assessment. Um, that's usually how the final exams are described. Uh, what was the average last year? I think it was over 70, but I don't have it. Yeah, I do have an evil laugh sometimes. It isn't it isn't extremely hard in terms of the material. What is challenging about the midterm and about all of these exams is you don't have a lot of time, so you have to be ready for it. And because you have to do them one at a time and can't backtrack, you can't choose which order to do the questions in. So that just makes it more challenging for you. It doesn't mean the material's hard. The final exam, on the other hand, is designed to be hard. It's multiple choice, multiple answer, fill in the blank, maybe. There's no significant maths on the midterm. If there is, it's relatively easy, straightforward maths. Okay. Yeah, so Constantinus, the atmospheric computations are really tricky. Actually, they're not that tricky. It's just you need practice doing them. So as I said, I promised to work through some problems. I'll post some more problems on the atmosphere. The kind of questions on the midterm are more about the kind of definitions and states. So what's the rule in the lower stratosphere with temperature? Anybody know? Yes, temperature is constant in the lower stratosphere. It decreases linearly in the troposphere. There are 19 questions on the midterm, but only 15 minutes. So that's what makes it a challenge. And again, negative marking is in effect. For those of you, I know several of you have had issues with internet connections while taking the quizzes. It kicks you out. There's a setting in Blackboard tests called what's called forced completion. It means you cannot close and reopen the window. That is now disabled for the midterm and the systems activity quiz. However, if you leave, the timer still runs. So what I need you to do if you have a significant outage is tell me right away. There are several people, I believe, that emailed late Friday or later in the afternoon Friday that may have had issues with their glider quiz. I'm going to get through those after lecture today. If I reopen the quiz for you, do not worry. Just do it immediately because you have notified me before the deadline of any issues. So therefore, you wouldn't be late. It's our end. But if you have any issues with the thing, at least notify me. It may take several days to catch up on some of this stuff and clear it out, but the clock stops when the issue, and we can check when you had that issue. The timer's on there. It's not a problem. Okay, have you all been responding to the poll? Keep responding to that, and I will join you back here in a couple seconds. thank you for pointing out that there was an error in the week by week guide. It is, you're right, 211. It was listed as 1211. The week commencing obviously is this calendar week, the syllabus plus week is correct. So that's now corrected. So that practice test that you had, again, it covers topics that are relevant to all of the assessments. So keep in mind, midterm are things like history, anatomy of an aircraft, the atmosphere, what is aerospace engineering, obviously low altitude and high altitude flight mechanics. So those are the topics. So that's the area. There is no past set because the question bank is the same, or it's based on the same set of questions, bank of questions as in the past. So it is the practice quizzes that you had. That's a broad range of stuff is the best practice. Okay. Can I remind folks to vote on the flight mechanics poll, and we'll start discussing it here in a second. In the meantime, any other questions that you want answered? Yep, should also remain the practice quiz that was made available before the glider activity should still be available. If you can't see it, it is an assessment and feedback at the top above assignment 1. If you can't see it, please tell me so I can look into it. But yeah, there's no availability limits on it. Where do you find the recorded Zoom sessions? The recorded Zoom sessions, like all recorded sessions once they're processed, are up on the podcast server. So if you go to the link for podcasts or videos.manchester, you can get there. They should also be added as an item in that portion of the learning module. So for instance, last week's one is now available in topic number 4. So let me share my screen here on this. So if we go to topic number 4, you'll see at the bottom the live question and answer session link, and there is the video is now embedded. So when this one is ready, it will get embedded. So all of the videos, when they're ready and when the podcast server is working properly, will get embedded in. I will be putting up, it's actually finally on the podcast server. There's been some issues of late. Next week's topic ones will get linked in at the end of today. So we'll do that, or at the end of this meeting. Okay. Yeah, practice quiz does not count. Yeah, topic 6 videos for next week. Okay, here's a completely separate one. Should you leave? That's up to you. What I would recommend you do from a perfectly public health point of view is if you are intending to leave, do not do any group activities with people other than that which you live with, and convince your flatmates the same for at least 5 and preferably a week to 10 days before you leave. And the reason why is it's just about minimizing the ability to spread coronavirus symptom areas from one region to another. Now, one of the nice things for most of our students now, if you look at overall Greater Manchester and the regions where students live, they're now dropping rapidly below the rest of the community around you. So you tend to be, you had your run, many of you have been isolated in the past, and you're good on that. But there is no reason that you need to be here. It is, I'll be blunt, unlikely that the university will be dropping from its quote unquote tier 3 status down to tier 2 before Christmas. I can't say that for sure. It is to be reviewed on the 11th of November. But given the current situation in Manchester and in England, and the fact that we are going to be in this higher level lockdown, higher level restriction status through at least the 2nd of December, I cannot fathom the university increasing the amount of face-to-face activities. So yeah, so that's that. No, further reading sections, and there's a response on the thing. So the further reading, additional reading is all for your information. If it's additional, then it's for your information to help you understand the material. It isn't meant to be an automatic or required, okay? So if it's something that's required beyond the videos, it will be listed as required, okay? Semester 2 can be online as well. So the current view of the university is that we are to offer more activities in person. However, I will say this, there will be no large in-person activities unless something magic happens in terms of vaccine. But do expect that some of you may be scheduled for mandatory accreditation-based activities in semester 2. The big one for you all will be the first of the workshop practice rounds. And the reason for this is we need to start processing you as soon as we can. The likely is that a majority of first year students will not do a workshop practice, but I don't know who it's going to be, okay? Yes. We'll get into the neutral point one. Okay. So when we get to the neutral point, Aditya, we'll talk about that. Okay. Checking if there's any questions that I've missed. Okay. I'm going to close the poll and share the results. Okay. The first question. Is the 2D, two-dimensional flat Earth approximation valid for flights of Concorde or similar? And 66% of you said yes, and 35% of you said no. Does anybody see an issue with these numbers?
Yeah. The numbers don't add up, so people vote yes and no.
I wonder about Zoom's rounding. So they've obviously rounded both up, and it's probably, so it's to be 65-35 or 66-34. But anyhow, so as we said in the notes, in the videos, it is only important for us to consider 3D effects if that term of velocity squared over the radius you're flying at is similar to that of the acceleration due to gravity. And we tend to say similar to for anything that's within about 3 to 10%. So if it's less than that, and that's a judgment call on the part of an engineer, if it's less than about 3 to 10%, the V squared over R is less than 10% of the acceleration due to gravity. So less than about 0.98 meters per second squared, or maybe a third of that, then we don't care about it. And it turns out if you use the 10% moniker, that it's about Mach 3 that it comes into effect. Concorde cruised at just above Mach 2. If you use the 3%, it's closer to Mach 5. So one of those questions that you could be asked, and if you look in the past exam papers, you may be asked to calculate what that percentage is and then make a judgment call on an exam. Okay, it's a simple equation. It's an easy calculation. So it's up to you. Or you may be asked, given these conditions, what is the ratio? And then make a judgment call. Okay. Which of the following are correct observations about the Earth? The circumference of the equator is greater than that around the poles. Each meridian has the same circumference. Earth's surface is bumpy, and the Earth is of uniform density. So 78% of you said that the circumference of the equator is greater than around the poles, and you're absolutely correct. So that's something to remember, that Earth is not spherical at that level. Anybody know why the equator has a larger circumference than around the poles? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Yeah, it's purely due to spin. And the interesting thing about that is not only does it change the shape of the Earth, but it changes the distribution of water over the surface of the Earth. So if the Earth stops spinning, the oceans would redistribute and the sea would recede at the equator and it would rise toward the poles. So around here, the sea level would rise substantially, as in more than we would ever worry about with climate change. It would be hundreds of meters in and around, say Norway or northern Britain. And so it makes a huge difference. Yeah, so we'll talk about that in just a second, the pattern of the Earth. Okay, 17% of you said that each meridian has the same circumference. And you know what? You can actually make that approximation, but it's not strictly true. So most of you got this one right. The meridians, Paris, London, Beijing, Washington, Tokyo, all have slightly separate different differences. And so when we talk about nautical miles and we talk about kilometers, those are based on very defined fractions of those circumferences. And when we went to harmonize all of the relationships back at the beginning of the 20th century, so that nautical miles and kilometers were related to each other in precise and not random or and rational reasons, we ended up having to break the rule. So the nautical mile is no longer strictly 1/60th of 1/360th of the way around the Greenwich meridian, and the same with the kilometer. Okay. A meridian is they're called meridians of longitude. So we have parallels of latitude. Those are the circles that go north and south of the equator. And the meridians of longitude are the ones that 10 degrees east, 5 degrees west, 0 degrees, 180 degrees. Those are meridians. That's what that term is. Okay. The Earth's surface is bumpy. 72% of you said this, yes. And it's pretty obvious. We have mountains. We have oceans, and that makes a difference because where you are and how things behave is dependent on how close you are to those masses. It changes the relative location of the center of rotation of something in an orbit. Not a big deal for aircraft flying low, but when you're doing stuff where V squared over R is big, that matters because that changes the R. And of course, only 14% of you said the Earth is of uniform density. We know it isn't. It's pretty obvious when you go and you have granite in one place and basalt in another. So that's pretty straightforward. Okay, you're asked a question or state something, but don't aircraft fly in a pattern that is chosen due to the Earth's roundness. So yes, we as aircraft, if we didn't have winds, would fly aircraft around the Earth in what's called the Great Circle. And that is, if we assume the Earth is a spheroid, the shortest distance between two places on the surface is a straight line on a globe, on a sphere. When flattened out on a projected map, it forms an arc or a circle. Now, as the Earth gets slightly less spherical because it's oblate, that curve changes shape slightly. It's still a straight line on that oblate spheroid globe, but the curve, when it's projected out on a flat surface like a map, will look slightly different, but it's still the Great Circle route. Now, we don't do this anymore in any of the units. It's kind of a lost art, but turns out that if you approximate a long distance flight, say here to Beijing or here to New York, if you approximate it as a series of what's called rum lines, where you fly heading for a while, make a slight turn, fly heading for a while, make a slight turn. The difference between the Great Circle distance and a rum line distance, where you say 5 or 6 rum lines over the flight to Beijing or New York, is only a couple percent in distance. So it makes a huge difference in overall distance if you just flew one straight line. It's much better to fly a few straight lines. Anybody know why aircraft don't fly the great circle distance most of the time? Yeah, wind. Yeah, if you had to do it precisely and didn't have auto navigation, you'd be making lots of corrections, but that's why we would fly rum lines. Yeah, the jet stream is a big deal. Okay. Someone asked the definition of the word neutral point, and we'll get to the definition of the word neutral point because we got a question on this here in a minute. But it's a really easy definition. And if we start with something really simple, like that definition, it's easy to figure out. Okay, number 3, an aircraft has to be stable to be in trim. 73% of you said yes, 27% of you said no. Anybody who said yes want to volunteer why they said yes? Yeah, Marwan.
Hi, sir. I mean the aircraft can have can trim when it's when it's pitching down or pitching up. However, it need to have the aerodynamics forces have to be balanced by the force of gravity, so it can be trim in any position. But the roll and rotation about the center of gravity have to be 0.
Okay. Anybody want, thank you, Marwan. Anybody want to say why they said no? Anybody want to volunteer? Shade?
I'm starting to think I should have said yes, but I said no initially because I was thinking about there's times in flight where the aircraft wouldn't be in trim, where it's like turning or ascending and descending. So it might not be stable, it might not be in trim, depending on different maneuvers, I guess.
Okay. Thomas, do you have something you want to add?
Is there to be in trim, like without any disturbances, just flying at equilibrium, without any disturbances? If it was unstable, it could still trim.
Yeah. So folks, Thomas is right. If you are in trim, the aircraft is not on its own trying to change its state. It's not rotating. It's not accelerating in any direction. And what that means is, absent any external input, the aircraft would continue in that state indefinitely. So what that means is that an aircraft could be stable, positively stable, neutrally stable, or unstable and be in trim. It is separate from. Now, what's confusing and what's important is that what happens when we perturb the aircraft. So a gust of wind comes and pushes the nose up slightly, that alpha prime in the equation. What does the aircraft do then? Without any input from the pilots or the flight control system, if it returns back to that same prior trim point, or at least close to it, it's called stable. If it stays where it's been perturbed to, it's neutrally stable. And if it continues to diverge, to move away from the trim point, it's negatively stable. So an aircraft can be in trim if it's not stable. In fact, can anybody think of aircraft that are not longitudinally stable in all flight regimes? Because most aircraft, believe it or not, that we fly on today can become unstable in certain flight regimes. Okay, so helicopters are an interesting case. The flight mechanics of that are much more complex, and yes, they can be unstable. They have other weird instabilities. Okay, some fighter jets, believe it, a lot fewer ones than you think of, but there's a really famous aircraft that was built originally in the late 1970s, and we didn't know about it till the 1980s, which is distinctly unstable longitudinally unstable in all flight regimes. Nope, not the Blackbird. That's the SR-71, by the way. The B-2, actually the B-2, believe it or not, is stable in a lot of flight regimes, but has some weird behavior. But it is something that's kind of related to the B-2. Preceded the B-2, but it was one of those secret projects. Yep, the F-117A Nighthawk, the original stealth fighter, is longitudinally unstable in all flight regimes. Now, interesting thing about Concorde. Concorde can be unstable depending on a lot of factors. And it turns out with Concorde, and we can go into a long aside on that, that one of the critical flight control systems on Concorde is the fuel pumps. Because as we go faster, and we'll talk about this when we talk about airfoils, wings, and lifting things in topic 7, so after the midterm, as we go faster, the aerodynamic center of the wings move, and therefore the neutral point of the aircraft moves. And so the Concorde could become unstable or overly stable, depending which direction you were going. So we'll talk about that some more, but you're absolutely right. Concorde is an augmented stability aircraft because it can end up in weird places. But believe it or not, every single commercial transport you fly on, there are portions of the flight envelope, not portions we're supposed to go to very often, but that do exist where the aircraft could become unstable or would be marginal at best. And that's a function of swept wings. And obviously, we know a lot more about it in terms of the common person because of the 737 MAX incidents. But there is nothing about the 737 MAX aerodynamically that isn't present on an A320, an old 727, a VC-10, A350, 747, A380, 787. All of those aircraft exhibit the same trends as the angle of attack increases. Okay. Question, what is CM in longitudinal static stability? CM, and we'll learn about in topic 7, is the coefficient of moment. So we'll have CL as coefficient of lift, CD is coefficient of drag, and CM is coefficient of moment. And it's just how much the wing naturally wants, or the aircraft naturally wants to turn. And that is separate from the moment due to lift, because the lift is away from the CG. And what we get on a wing is that's because we generate lift at different points on the wing, and it generates differently. So the wing tends to want to rotate. Most wings only have a non-zero CM if they're cambered. So a flat plate, what's called a symmetric aerofoil, has a 0 CM. And it is the same, should be the same at 0 lift as it is at a CL of 1. So we'll talk about that more. Okay, X-29 is a very interesting aircraft, and we can talk about this one at length at leisure if you want. We can do asides and things. The X-29, yes, it is a statically unstable aircraft, but that was because they were trying to do high maneuverability testing. But it's also, because it's forward swept wing, what's called a structurally unstable aircraft, which is a different thing. And that means the wings have this tendency to want to rip off. And how you control that's a big deal. And that's why we didn't see forward swept wings until we had very active flight control systems. Okay, number 4, for an aircraft to be stable, the CG should be where relative to the neutral point? Forward, at the neutral point, or aft? And this gets into the basic definition of neutral point. So we're relatively evenly split with the plurality at 43% for at, 31% forward, and 25% aft. Okay, this is a concept I want you guys to spend some time on because it is critical to everything we do with longitudinal stability from here on through the end of your career. The definition of neutral point, key is in the word neutral. The neutral point is a place on the aircraft due to the configuration where if we located the CG at that point, and it is actually a 3-dimensional point, so it's forward, aft, up, down, left, right, sides that way. There's a 3-dimensional point. If you put your CG at exactly that point, the aircraft would be neutrally stable, meaning if there was a perturbation which lifted the nose up, it would stay there. It wouldn't return, it wouldn't diverge. If there was a perturbation that shifted the nose left or right, it would stay there. If it rolled it slightly, it would stay there. Now, with roll, it's a bit more complex, but longitudinally and laterally, that's the direction where the nose points, there is a really simple point that you can estimate and exists. If the aircraft is stable, what you need to think about are what happens to the moments around the CG if you increase it. If your CG is in front of your neutral point, when you raise the nose slightly, the moment becomes more nose down, it wants to push it back down to where it was before. If the CG, and that's what we call positively stable. If the CG is aft of the neutral point, that perturbation that's nose up, the lifting moment, all that wants to now keep it going up. And so therefore, because the wing and all of that's now in front of the CG, it's unstable. So the correct answer is for an aircraft to be positively stable, the CG must be forward of the neutral point. Okay. Nicholas, you said what's wacky and any reason why we might want that? Okay. There's a separate question. Is there much of a difference between neutral point and center of lift? Yeah, we'll talk about it more in topic 7. They're very distinctly different things. The neutral point is the point where the derivatives of moments go to 0, but the center of lift, if your CG is located there, that's where the moments go to 0. So dm goes to 0 at the neutral point, m goes to 0 at the center of lift, aerodynamic moments. Does the neutral point depend only on aircraft configuration? We say yes, but in reality, no. It depends upon aircraft configuration first and foremost. And for most of the flight regime, most of the angles of attack that we fly at, most of the lift coefficients we fly at, it only depends on configuration. However, as we get to higher and higher angles of attack, and depending on the configuration, the neutral point may shift. And that's because what happens is the flow around our wings begins to separate, and it doesn't separate evenly along the whole span. And if our wing is swept forward or swept aft, it will move the neutral point around. Okay, but first order, it is solely on configuration. And even deploying flaps shouldn't change it or change it appreciably. Okay, so it's first order depends solely on configuration. It's only at the extremes of the flight envelope where other things may come into play. Okay, now number 5. For a standard wing-tail aircraft, the lift on the horizontal tail is most likely to be negative for most trim flight regimes. That means if we consider lift pointing up, assume we're flying level, at a low angle of attack, no climb, not climbing, lift and weight should be directly opposite each other. So pointing down would be pointing down. 64% of you said yes, true. 36% of you said false. Here's one I want you to do the calculations on. Put the CG somewhere in front of the neutral point, and we'll do the math. Don't do it now, but we can talk about how to do that. And you should be able to show that in almost all cases, and there may be a few corner cases, that this tail lift has to point down. And that's just the only way to get that moment dm d alpha to be less than 0 is you have to have a negative tail lift. What this means is that because of that, your wing has to generate more lift to account for that downforce. So when we talk about aircraft being trimmed, the more stable the aircraft is, the more lift your wing has to generate to counter that downforce on the tail, the less efficient it is. And we'll talk about why that happens in topic 7. Okay. Now, here's an interesting one. So you all did the glider activity. Significant nose down trim may lead to which of the following conditions? Aerodynamic stall, loss of longitudinal control, excessive airspeed, loss of thrust, high pilot workload. Anybody want to say why who put aerodynamic stall, why they think it might lead to aerodynamic stall? Remember, this is nose down trim. Okay, you don't have to. So remember, aircraft wings, airfoils stall based on angle of attack. Nose down trim wants to lower our angle of attack. We want to fly at a lower angle of attack. So it's very unlikely to lead to aerodynamic stall, at least of the wing. It is possible you could stall the tail, but very unlikely to lead to aerodynamic stall of the wing. Loss of longitudinal control? Absolutely. I can put so much trim in, nose down trim, that I don't have the ability to control the aircraft because I don't have enough rest of my control authority. We try to design aircraft where that's not the case, but a lot of aircraft, due to a lot of factors, not just aerodynamic, but hydraulics and mechanical and all of that, there may be flight regimes where with enough nose down trim and enough things that go with it, you just don't have the ability to move the elevator, say, i.e. 737 MAX could enter that condition. It definitely leads, those 69% of you, leads to excessive airspeed. Remember, nose down trim is just a trim to increase the speed at which your aircraft is trimmed at. In the case of 737 MAX, it turns out that the stabilizer, when it would run to its stop because of the angle of attack error, the trimmed airspeed was well beyond what the aircraft could do, and the only way it could do that was in a dive. And that's not very good when you're close to the ground. It's unlikely you'll lose thrust doing it, and obviously it can lead to significant pilot workload. And actually, I'll just quickly bring up a screen on this because one of you asked a question about this in, where is it? In this, in the discussion boards. So this is 737. This is not a MAX, believe it or not, but the stabilizer works the same. So nose down trim, the way they do it on an aircraft like this is they increase the angle of attack on the stabilizer. So it's generating more up force, and that wants to push the nose down. And as we said, that wants to increase the airspeed. Now, what happens then is, of course, the nose goes down, the airspeed goes up, and the pilots don't want that to happen. So they do this to kill the lift on the tail, and that brings the nose up. The problem is, of course, eventually your airspeed's so high, the forces are so high, whatever, it's very hard to do. And you can get into, obviously, a bad situation. Other aircraft use different systems for this purpose. The A320, their automatic flight control system, actually, instead of trimming the stabilizer, does more nose down input on the elevator and trims the stabilizer. And believe it or not, if you enter the same condition and you don't respond to it quickly, it's even more catastrophic. The nice thing is it's less likely to enter that condition than the 737 MAX was. And I don't know if it's easier to recognize on the 737 MAX. I'm on the A320 because it's just less likely. The 737 next gen, which this is here, it's much easier to recognize that the stabilizer is doing that because the behavior was much more consistent. It was also easier to correct for due to some other features that they removed for one reason or another in the design. And that's basically what made the 737 MAX unsafe, is that they removed some safety features and added some authority to the system. And that's why, because we've never lost a 737NG to an angle of attack sensor failure. And we've had many angle of attack sensor failures. They fail roughly once in between every 100,000 and million flight hours. And the 737 NG has hundreds of millions of flight hours. So it can increase pilot workload. It does decrease safety margins, but it's very different. But you change the way the aircraft behaves, especially if the pilots are expecting it to behave like it used to, and you can get very bad outcomes. Okay. So as I said, next week, because we're at the end of this, next week we are going to have 2 hours. First hour will be topic 6. I'll make the videos available here in 5 minutes, so don't worry. They are up on the podcast server. They're just not linked into the Blackboard. That was just when they became available. I will make this video available as soon as I can get it uploaded. And then for the first hour next week, we will talk about topic 6. And the second hour, we will talk about questions and problems for the midterm. If you have any questions that you want to go over, anything you want to go there, either live or want me to do recorded for you to watch afterwards, just put it up either in assessment questions on the discussion board or lecture series appropriately titled, and I'll do that. Before I go, any questions that I've missed that you definitely want me to cover? Format for the midterm is the exact same style as the glider assessment. There are a few additional styles of questions on it, but it's the same basic style. Okay. Okay, folks, thank you very much. And I will see you next week. And yes, it is the week after next. It opens Friday a week and closes Friday a week after. Okay, cheers.